Hi, I'm Eileen Muller from New Zealand, and it's Sunday morning here, and it's Saturday afternoon for a lot of you in the States. And I would like to welcome Dan and Robert Zangari to the Action Fantasy Book Club so that we can have a chat about classic fantasy and, in particular, their book, A Prince's Errand, which some of you will have been reading today.
Hi guys,
So,
thanks
Hi.
for thanks for having us. We're excited to chat about classic fantasy, and that's kind of our jam. So we might get a little long winded, but bear with us.
that's fine. I know your books are quite long-winded too, aren't they? Like you have real, no, I don't mean long-winded in that term, but they're big, fat books, aren't they, with a lot of
Yes.
content in them.
Yep. Yeah. They're so a Prince's Errand's 325,000 words and about 1,000 pages. I mean, we had to condense it to try to make the print costs more manageable. But yeah, and the Dark Necromancer is shaping up to be about a little bigger than that. So yeah, we kind of have a lot of stuff we like to talk about in our books, and a lot of characters and storylines,
Covered
and
a lot of ground.
yeah. Well, and I guess that happens after 30 years of working on a project, right?
Yeah,
30?
kind of takes on its own life.
So yeah, he's been working on this since 1991, and so the
Wow.
world and all this stuff, we've it's been pretty well established.
So
So
when did you come in? I mean, how old were you then? You must have been pretty young, right? I won't ask, but
um,
when did you
He
come
was,
into play
he
on
was
this, Robert?
five.
I wasn't
Sorry?
five when I started working. I was five when he started, but actually, my earliest contributions were when I was a teenager, and so he had been working on the series for about 10 years, and then he got some advice to go and start from the beginning, and we ended up he started working on what is now our second, third, fourth, and fifth books, and he had them all into one story at the time. But anyway, I first was helping him on. We were looking at a kind of a dungeon design um, for one of the places that our characters go to, and I remember making a sketch of this pyramid fortress and its towers, and I don't think I think it was you had the idea of the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of helped refine it a little bit, and we drew out some maps. And I was 16 then, so that was what was that 2002.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually officially start working with him until till 2011, and it was right after my son had died, and I just needed something to you know take up the time between school, and I was looking at getting another side job to kind of pay for college. And he was like, well, why don't you just come over and work with me, and I'll pay you to help me write, kind of like a ghostwriting gig in a way. And so I was like, okay, we'll do that. And then
hmm
just started having a lot of fun with it, and said, you know what, I think I'm gonna pursue this as a career because I like this. This is a lot of fun, and I get to work with my dad, and we have a lot of fun together. And so we thought, well, let's go ahead and do that.
Well, and one of the reasons why I asked Robert to help me is he had written a martial arts book already and published it. And I'm like,
Right. What
I'm
age was that for? Like a
It
chapter book
was
or?
no, it was a more of a self-help how-to thing that I was actually using, kind of like a reader magnet in a way, to attract more attention to my martial arts business that I had at the time. So
Okay.
my plan was to write like seven different volumes, each covering different aspects of my martial art, because a mixed martial art that I had kind of made up between um, Jeet Kune Do, Ninjutsu, Wing Chun, and karate. So I had a little bit of experience there with the book publishing, and that's when he's like, "Well, why don't you come over and help me?" So
That's amazing. So you would have been, you would have been. Did you
let's
say
see.
still a teen? No, you had your
no,
son
No,
passed away,
he
didn't
was
you?
yeah, I had just been
20s?
home from my mission a couple years, and so I was
mid
23.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, I was
Yeah. And
23.
you'd had a. I forgot that we'd had that in common. That we both had a son pass away, and we've both had neonatal children and all
Yep.
sorts of stuff. I think we should welcome Josiah into the studio since he's online. Hi, Josiah. Nice to see you.
Hey,
Hey.
everybody. Sorry I'm a little late here. I've been planning for some guests this coming week and spent the most on groceries that I've ever have. So, but yeah, glad to be here.
Hey, that's what I was doing. I was putting away groceries before
Yeah,
I
you
hopped
too?
on.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep.
It's Sunday morning here. I was editing a client's manuscript.
There you go.
Which I have 2 people a year that I edit their manuscripts because otherwise I don't get enough writing done. So Josiah, which part of the country are you in and what time is it there?
So I'm in Colorado, so it's mountain time here, 5 o'clock. Yeah.
Okay, and you're at 4 over there, aren't you, Dan and Robert?
No, we're
No,
at 5.
We're at 5. We're in
Oh, you're
Utah.
5. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're neighbors.
And I'm at
Just
11
on the other
a.m.
side
in the
of the
morning in
continent.
New Zealand.
Yeah, just a little
And I have
different.
all my blinds drawn because I always sign off my newsletter saying, cheers from my sunny little office in New Zealand. When I open all the blinds, it washes everything out and it looks completely white because I have windows on 3 sides in my office. It's actually winter here, but we've got a beautiful sunny day. But I have my heating cranked up because it's freezing. You guys are in hot summer, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
very
Yeah,
hot.
We've
Very
been having
hot.
a heat wave. It's been 104 a couple days here, so it's been.
I have to convert that to Celsius. Is that like 35, 40 or something? I'm really bad at that.
Yeah,
No
I
idea.
think 35-ish. I can't remember, but yeah, it's pretty warm.
Yeah, that is really hot. And is what I found when I went to Utah last time was that the dryness of the air, like it's really humid here because we have beaches all around us. We live in a big island. Like it takes
Right.
I don't know 12, 15 hours to traverse the island. But it's because it's really humid here. When it's cold, it's freezing. Like the air is damp and cold. I was in Utah and it was like 5 degrees Celsius, whatever that is for you guys, but that's just a little bit above freezing, right? And I was walking around and I had on 2 or 3 merino jumpers, like we wear them all the time down here, and a big ski jacket and a scarf and a hat. And I went out for a walk and I came back half an hour later in a t-shirt. It was cold, but it was hot. Like it just was dry. And because the air is so dry, it's not as cold. And also because it's when it gets hot, it's not as humid. So you don't feel that, it's just so different. Yeah. Anyway, enough talk about the weather.
Perks of being in the desert.
Yeah.
There are a few.
And we have something we call a desert here, but it gets snow. Like it's what we call the desert road. It's all tundra and it's really high up. So it gets a lot of snow in winter, but it's not a desert like you guys have. If you see me looking down and doing this, it's because I'm typing and looking at Facebook and trying to figure out if we have people online with us at the moment. At the moment, nobody's online yet. If people are online, if they allow StreamYard to have access to their Facebook account, it's not permanent. It's just for the duration of the broadcast so that their comments turn up on the screen. That will be helpful. And we were talking about how many years. Did you realize, Josiah, that, Dan, you've been writing this since 1991 in this series? Is that right?
Wow. So literally before I was
like
born.
Babies.
That's crazy. Wow.
I'm not telling you how old I am, but I was well and truly alive by then.
That's
actually
awesome.
that's when I went to Switzerland. I went off to Switzerland in 1991 to, I was one of these crazy people that traveled around the world on my own with a backpack and went through Asia on my own back then in my 20s, just absolutely nutty. I don't know how I survived.
That's got to be an adventure. You'll have to tell us about it sometime.
I have a few really hairy adventures, but not today. Today we're focusing on your series and a little bit about classic epic fantasy and what's influenced us. So we were just talking about the fact that Robert had been writing a martial arts book, like a self-help book to help with his martial arts business. And so Dan, there was a point in his life where things got a bit hard after he'd lost his son. And Dan said, why don't you come and write with me? So now we're going to hear a little bit more. Can we hear a little bit more about the dynamics of how you write together now? Does someone do plotting? Does someone shape the story more? Is one of you more the editor? Do you both do alternate chapters? Go for it.
So I'm kind of like the bright colors, broad brush guy. That was what was hard for me to get it going and get it all written like the way I wanted it to, because I was writing like the scope of the whole thing from end to end and not a lot of detail. And Robert puts all the detail in. He's the detail guy, and he comes up the plot lines and how the story ought to go. And, you know, I'm just writing along like, this is the way I want it to go. And he's like, well, that doesn't, you know, we gotta make a plot line. We gotta make it interesting for people to want to read it, you know. And, I'm just
So I
I'm just
find that
writing
sometimes,
along. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I'm like, well, it's interesting to me, but
Well, I was gonna say it's not that it wasn't interesting. It was just so quick. Like I had mentioned, you know, he had the first books 2 through 6 uh, plotted out, and that was gonna be the first book of the trilogy at the time. And you know, it was we started writing it, and I was like, I don't think we can fit
but
this
think.
all into one book. Because by the time we got done with arcs 1 and 2, the manuscript was already at 257,000 words. So we're like, let's just cut it here, and then we can put the rest of that into a story.
I
Which
did
then we
exactly
ended
the
up
same
putting
thing.
at the end.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
my
ended
first
up.
book was 223,000 words, which is 2/3 the size of the Lord of the Ring trilogy, and that was my first book. And it meandered all over the place, and I had so many. It's now 2 books, and they're each 93K. You know, so and that was after, I don't know, 18 revisions, and then I rewrote the whole thing. I threw it out and rewrote it. When you're talking about details, like, does, I should say dad and son, but does Dan sort of draft like, oh, this is the battle and this is where I want everyone to go, and he's writing it, and then you go in and put the sword plunging into someone and the blood splurting and the smells and the sights and the chink of the armor and all the sensory stuff that brings that detail to life? Or is
Pretty
it different
much.
to that?
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. We'll hash out things together, like when we're plotting, and we'll be like, okay, this. I'll come to the table with like the little minor stuff and be like, we know that this stuff has to happen, so let's talk about this and see where we want it to go. And we kind of hash out what we want for that scene, and then I'll go ahead and write it. So like the majority of the prose is mine, and we did that because he doesn't type as fast as I do. So
I'm like,
yeah, he chicken pecks. He's just like. I'm like, I don't know how he does it for work, because you know he's got to write up all these proposals, and I'm like, okay, but you know, he's valuable, so I guess you know it works for him, whatever process he's got going on with his day job. So
Yeah.
but you know, we plan together, and then I'll execute it, and then we'll go back and we'll review it and see, okay, how's this look, and then we'll go on to the next one. So we kind of nowadays we tackle that like chapter at a time, although with the Dark Necromancer we really haven't done that as much.
Well, a lot of that is because a lot of what is in the Dark Necromancer has been there. You know, we kind of hashed a lot of that out, and it's going a little different direction than when we originally wrote the Dark Necromancer, but not significantly. That, you know, I've been reading through it as he's been doing it, so. And what I've been reading, I've been like, oh, that's pretty good. I wish we would. Yeah, we should have done that before. And so, you know, it's good. It's really good. But yeah, I don't think we've had to do a lot of detailed collaboration on the Dark Necromancer, because we had done so much before with it, with 2 rewrites of it before. So
yeah, because we had our debut version of it, which came out in 2013, which had those 2 storylines, and then and we had been shopping around to get it traditionally published, and every publisher said, we like it, but you have to cut it. And we said, nope, we're not doing that. And so we never signed any deals, and that kind of is what eventually led us to really go full tilt into indie publishing. And then we decided after a while, like our sales did okay, and then there was a big drop off, and we weren't really doing marketing back then. I mean, you could get away with a lot of organic stuff back in the early teens, but we decided, well, maybe there is something to it, and we can split it up into 2 books. which we ended up doing. We called one The Dragon's Legacy, and then the other one was The Elven Secret. And that kind of was the formation of, okay, we gotta cut these other storylines up and actually make each storyline its own book. We wanted to do kind of a double arc of, two different stories in a book, and that didn't quite work. But it,
I've got that. I've got all sorts of stories woven through mine.
yeah. So go ahead. Sorry, Eileen.
I was just going to ask Josiah, when you're writing, Josiah, do you do that? Do you do a broad plot and then fill in detail, or do you everything as you go, or what's your process? Because you're writing on your own, so you're not going to argue with yourself a lot, or do you?
Oh, of course. Every writer hears voices in their head, don't they?
Oh no, not me, never.
So yeah, I would say, yeah, it is kind of similar process. Funnily enough, I'll have like a broad overline or outline where I know generally what's going to happen. I don't always know how it's going to happen, and that's kind of part of the fun of the process, right? Figuring out, oh, where exactly does this solution? What's the most natural conclusion to this? How do I get there? And so I kind of find my way there as I write. Oh, hey, hello to whoever joined us.
It's Arthur.
Oh, the Arthur. Perfect. So yeah, and then I'll try and find my way there, like plotting a little bit ahead as I kind of into the darkness as I go along through the book. And it keeps it fresh, but doesn't go completely off the rails. Yeah, so that's generally it. What about you, Eileen?
I'm trying to manage comments at the same time, so my head's going back and forth. It's a whole multitasking thing. I use an Excel sheet to plot, which I found is very bizarre. I've met one other person in the world who does. I was interviewed on Mark Dawson's self-publishing formula podcast once, and I mentioned that I used Excel, and I had this guy reach out to me and go, "Oh my goodness, I found the only other person." So, and I do that because I have in my first book, my first series of 6 books, there were over 50 point of view characters. And I switch between them fluidly the whole way through. And my readers are like, some of them are like, I didn't want to read multi points of view, but these just flow because I always write a scene from the character who has the most to lose. So whoever's got the most to lose in that scene, that's the person whose point of view it is, because then you get more raw emotion coming through. And because I have lots of storylines interwoven throughout my books and lots of subplots, I've discovered I'm quite unusual like that. A lot of people go, oh no, we'll trim this down. We'll keep it small. I'm like, I could include that person and this person. Oh, that dragon could see the scene this way. And it all just, so I have a big list of 50 or whatever characters I've done, just the main ones usually. And then I have a timeline across the top, and they're all color coded, and there's various things the characters have to learn in each act. And there's a main sort of 3-act or 4-act structure. And then I just fill in the blanks for the first third of the book, and usually for the last of the book. And in the middle, I have some vague storylines, and then I start writing. And I produce these things. So these are the last 2 scenes of the book I'm currently writing. I've got 2
spoilers.
To go. So I just produce
that
these
out
cards.
in editing.
Yeah, sometimes these are from America because index cards in America are really cheap. In New Zealand, they're really expensive. So when I was in the States, I went to Walmart and just bought stacks
stocked up,
took them home, which is nuts, right? But I've got to be drawing these things for every book. And sometimes I'll plot them all, and then I'll get like I get to the end of that third or near the end of that third of the book, and by then I have all the other everybody's motivations and little quirky things figured out. And then I write a few more of these, and I go out and walk around the bush and dictate, or I dictate here, or I just write. I use all sorts of methods, and then come up with my story. And then I go back to the Excel sheet and go, wow, some of that was really accurate. And I don't fill in the middle. I used to go back and fill in everything that happened. I just keep these now, and then I have all my and each of my characters I write in Scrivener, so they're all color coded.
Okay.
Oh, so you use that functionality. I've never used
so
that
great.
before.
Oh, it's so much fun. And so I just go and look, and I go, okay, I've got a blue, red, yellow, pink, time I put a green point of view, and so needs to say something, or, but it usually is determined by the action. And how much your plot is driven by character, how much is driven by action, how much is driven by the actual world and what's happening in it and the politics.
I think for ours, it's pretty action driven. A lot of the scenes that we had originally written in the first time was really action oriented. And that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to do a different tense. We were writing in an omniscient third present tense just because it let the action flow a little faster. But turns out a lot of traditional fantasy readers don't like that. So that was another reason why we decided, let's go and redo the story again.
I tried to write like that, and I just found it was so much more emotional and visceral when you're writing in the character's head, when you get to experience all of their emotions and things. What about you, Jazar?
I tend to keep very close third person usually. I've done some first person as well. I have a couple series that are in first person, but I think I do third person a little bit better. You have to be very voicey in first person, and I don't think I'm quite that voicey. But yeah,
I mean, you have a voice, but it's sometimes this is the thing. It's like, what is the character's voice and what is the author's voice? Like I've had readers say, "Oh, I know when I pick up an Eileen Miller book because I know it's going to sound like this." And I'm like, "Oh, how do I sound?"
I know.
But, there's that whole thing, making your characters distinct. So, some ways of doing that is with slang or with particular. I've heard what's really cool is if you take a character and you give them an emotion, an overriding emotion, the way that they see the world. So I've got a character who everything he sees is jaded and cynical and mistrusting. And then the minute you're in that point of view, you know that that's him. But that's very, very hard to do. But it's a skill that we develop as we go along, I guess. So,
it's almost like acting. You gotta get into that part as you're writing. And I know for me, that's one thing that I have to do is I've got to get into the right mindset. I can't just, open up the laptop, start typing. I've got to, sit, prepare. Sometimes I'll do it in the shower and I'll be like, okay, I've got to be able to like get into character before I start typing.
So when you're getting in the character, do you visualize particular things, or are you thinking certain thoughts that they would think, like remembering their thought patterns? What does that look like?
Yeah, a lot of it is I first start off with the imagery of what's going on, and then I'm like, okay, so how is this person going to react? And then that's kind of how I start. I use the setting, and then I go into look at the character, and then just kind of pare it down to try to get into that mindset.
Yeah, I find
you design.
When I'm having trouble, so sometimes writing is you just sit down and write and it's easy, right? But the times when it's more difficult, I purposely think about what is this character smelling in this scene. And for some reason, maybe it's because smells associated with memory, right? I'm wondering if because of that association, that particularly works for me for like remembering what is going on in this scene. It tends to work most times, so maybe you should try it.
Does it always smell?
So I'll picture stuff too, of course, but if I'm having trouble, then yes, I go to smell as the first thing, because it's like it's not the first thing you think of like in a scene, right? So it makes it more real in some sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so my writing mentor David Farland had developed a process where he was different appeals that you're doing, and smell was one of the things that he's like, if you really want to draw a reader in, you do smells, and that's
really
smells a lot. And it's real bad because in the slave camp in Death Valley, you can sort of see like a brown, maybe you can see a brown spot on the map up there.
Oh, yeah.
That's Death Valley. There's lots of open sewage pits. So it's like, I feel sorry for my readers.
Hey, you're just giving them a more real experience.
Well, Tamar's the hero in Dragon Hero, he has to actually dig sewage pits, and you're down in them while you're digging them, and then the latrines explode and it all comes flooding out and all the slaves scramble out of the pit. And it's like there are so many experiences. There's some pretty awful deaths that happen in it. Anyway, but no spoilers.
Right.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I found for me, when I go for, excuse me, I've got a bit of a, hang on a sec.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about David Farland real fast. So are you in Salt Lake City? I missed where you were in Utah.
Just north of it, yeah. And we're about 25 minutes north of Salt Lake.
Okay. Because he also...
Provo, or... No, that's south. Where are you? It's
Where am I?
no.
Oh, them.
Robert, which part of, is it Salt Lake itself, or is it one of the little?
No, we're in Layton, which is north
Oh
of
yeah, no, that's
Salt
cool.
Lake, so we're about 25 miles away. We're right next to the Hill Air Force Base. So in fact,
You get a lot
my
of
house
plane
is
noise.
right under the flight path, so we get to see the jets all the time.
And hear them.
Yes.
And does the house shake?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
I've
it
got
does.
our friend lives next to the airport here. The windows rattle when the planes go past.
Yeah,
What
we've
about you, Josiah? Oh, sorry, I keep interrupting. Go for it.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just asking the location. So is that where David Farland lived? Because I think he also mentored Brandon Sanderson. Am I
Yeah.
correct about that?
Yeah, so Dave lived in Provo and was a professor at BYU early 2000s.
Okay.
And that's where Brandon had taken his class. And because Dave was heading the creative writing class there, which is the class that Brandon teaches now. But in that, like, among Brandon's cohorts were Brandon Mull, James Dashner, who wrote Maze Runner, Stephanie Meyer, who wrote Twilight. They were all in that same class together.
Wow.
And so yeah, Dave had mentored them, and after Dave needed to move because of his allergies, and so he moved down to St. George, and I think that was 2006 ish. It was about 2007 maybe. It was somewhere around there. It might have even been 2008. It was definitely after he was doing a book tour with Brandon when second Mistborn book came out. So whenever that was. But yeah, he had moved down there, and then Dave would come up and would do uh, writing classes up here, and that's actually where I met him. I met him at Salt Lake Comic Con, and there was a TV ad that was on our local news network that he was talking about his Story Doctor website, where he was mentoring and helping people with um, their stories and teaching them how to write and things like that. And so that's when I first got in contact with him. That was 2015. And so yeah, he was doing that, but the last few years before he passed, we were doing everything online. And the Apex Writers group that he established had all of his courses in there that he recorded. And so Dave just wanted to make sure that he had his legacy preserved, and and decided, I'm going to record everything that I know so that I can keep teaching. I guess there's a history of people passing away early in his family, so he's like, I know I'm going to go, before I'm 70, so
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of this. So, but yeah, one of the things that that he really hammered with the actual writing was this KAV cycle, where you appeal to the kinesthetic emotion, and then you have an auditory thing going on, then you have a visual, and then you keep repeating that cycle over and over and over
And
again.
taste. You can
Yep,
use
and then
taste
you
as
can
well, which is quite
interject
effective.
things in between there: taste, smell, and just things that will keep the reader hooked and engaged throughout the story.
So
Yeah,
we've
love
got
that.
so I'm realizing that we're talking a lot about the writing side of things, and
Yeah.
this is the Action Fantasy Book Club. Are there any,
Yeah.
and so are there any favorite type of action sequences that you all as authors enjoy choreographing or writing, or how do you choreograph your fight scenes? Do you have experts you go to? In particular, I know you do martial arts, so there'll be a bit of that in family. But in terms of action, what sort of action? I don't know, anything. Talk about action and how you put it into your stories, and what you like and what you enjoy and what your readers enjoy.
I like sword fights. That's one of my favorite go-to things. But I do enjoy writing the hand-to-hand combat. But I think my favorite is when we can interject magic into it, because then that just brings in whole different things that are fun to write and explore. And oh, what if we did this? So for me, I love when we have action infused with magic, and we can kind of really hit that wonder beat in the story.
And a bit of snarky banter, or goes a long way too. I love having my dragons interject in battle, and say smart stuff. What about you, Josiah? Or Dan? Is there any particular type of magic you enjoy using? Or
Well, I think for me, I'm like Robert. I kind of like the combination of a fight where you can include magic, and that was kind of the thing that when I first started looking at these and writing these things, I was putting a lot of magic and use of magic into the story and into the different scenes and things. So, and that kind of came from me doing when I was in college. I was involved with Dungeons and Dragons a lot. We played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and there you can infuse a lot of magic into what you're doing, and that really got me interested. That kind of is what got me started interested in all that.
So speaking on Dungeons and Dragons, is that like a big influence for your world building?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Dungeons and Dragons and like games inspired by that, books inspired that. I found for certain stories, those are hugely influential as well for me. Which is why, I don't know, Baldur's Gate, the newest Baldur's Gate game. I am very excited about that.
Yeah.
So ready to play that. But
I have never let myself get addicted to games because I know that if I got into them, I would never get out of them. I would never write. I would never read. I may not feed my kids. So, but I grew up with a dad who was really into computers. So back in the 80s, 70s, however old I am, we had a green screen computer, like bright yellow. I don't know if it was an Amiga or something else, but we had this little tiny computer, sort of smaller than a laptop now, or small as a little laptop, and it had a green screen and it had grey writing on it, and that was how we played Dungeons and Dragons. You would choose option A, B, C, or D. Are you going to go down to the dungeon? Are you going to knock on the door, run away? And that was how I played with my brothers and sisters. We would sit there, but they loved it so much that we always argued about whose turn it was. And so we would so I played a few times, and then I was like, oh my goodness, I love this. I'll go read a book while they argue, So, but that was my first Dungeons and Dragons experience.
Mine was even more basic than that. We sat around the table in a group, and well, not that bad. But we had little figurines, But basically, you had a DM, a dungeon master, and he had his thing, and he had a little board thing that hid everything, and we just were playing around the table, and it was all in your head. It was all
people that still do that. And, I've got friends that still meet with the dungeon master, all their little figures, but the figures are way more elaborate, and the boards and the books and things.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so my first experience was a black, just a green computer screen with grey writing, and it was all in your head. So, but it's a great tool for imagination, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is.
It is.
And I think that's kind of, I played Dungeons and Dragons too because of him. And I think that really helped with our imagination and coming up with things and having, because, you got to be doing so many things in Dungeons and Dragons. It's very action based, you got to perform actions and stuff. So I think a lot of our storytelling is our readers, our characters doing things. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of stems a lot from that.
Yeah, I think it does.
And then you have consequences and magic systems and things. Mm-hmm. So I know one of the things you wanted to talk about today was classic fantasy and how that's influenced your writing, and or the lack of classic fantasy, or whatever it is that's influenced your writing. So do you want to talk about more influences on your writing and what's helped you develop your magic systems? And you too, Josiah. So who wants to go first?
Well, I have a question. So the omniscient third person that you started off as, and I assume, Dan, you were starting off in that point of view. There's a lot of classic fantasy that has third person omniscient, and I'm guessing that's kind of what influenced you starting off with that point of view.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, that was one of the big things. Frank Herbert's Dune, very similar because Frank was able to really fluidly move in and out of things, and it really was head hopping. But he got away with it by having the telepathy. But that was kind of what we had done, was we would be going back and forth between the characters in the same scene without any scene breaks. And so that was kind of that. You see that a lot more in more classic stuff where there's not that abrupt change. And yeah, that was kind of one of the big things for us of it being classic.
Right.
So
doing
I think that was when I wrote my first manuscript. I was like that. I went in and out of everybody's heads in the same scene, and I couldn't see anything wrong with it, because a lot of the fantasy I'd read growing up and even into my adult years was still like that. But there became this edict sort of in the 90s, 2000s probably, where you didn't do that. For readers who are listening, head hopping is when you switch point of views within a scene. So nowadays, most authors tend to write where they have one character's point of view for a scene, and then they switch scenes if they're going into another character. And I know I have read some scenes that are a sentence long. The most impactful scene I have ever read in my life was this character. He was dying. It was a dystopia. Oh gosh, I've got to remember who it was by. And he was dying, and someone was trying to, his lover was trying to help him through this crisis where he was dying. And her scenes were long, and his got shorter and shorter and shorter. And then I flicked the chapter, and it had his name at the top, and there was nothing on the page. It was by Ali Condé. And I just burst into tears, flipped the page, and kept going. Like he had died.
Yeah.
He didn't. He came back to life. Whoops, spoiler. But it was just that page where, he went from having half a page to a couple of paragraphs to a sentence to 2 or 3 words to nothing. And that just hit me so strongly. Yes, I have used that technique, but not with a blank page, but where I had someone dying and ended up with like a 2 or 3 words. And that was it. And it just strings your readers out. There's ways of creating tension. So as a reader, that was like, oh my God, I just burst into tears. He's gone. And he was this amazing guy. Of course, they all are, right? But I read a lot of Dragon Riders of Pern, which has head hopping, which has a lot of different perspectives. It has dragons, it has sci-fi, fantasy. It's got so many different. It's like a real mashup of a lot of different elements from different genres in it. I mean, it is a sci-fi series because it's set off-world on a different planet, but most of the mechanisms she uses are fantasy oriented because they're in the sort of equivalent of a low technology medieval sort of society when they get there, until they discover spaceships and all sorts of other stuff. So that influenced me quite a lot, which is one of the reasons I write dragons. What about you, Josiah? What influenced you?
Yeah, I think about, so it's interesting. So having a lot of my influences do go back to like The Hobbit, especially. I still love The Hobbit. I reread it a couple of years ago, and it's still so good. Holds up.
Okay, your audio has just glitched out.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me?
No, it's gone really quiet. Can you hear them, Dan, or is it me?
No, it's very faint.
Yeah, it just went faint suddenly. I think you might have knocked your cable.
Come back to me.
Not quite.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Okay. I think another thing for one of our influences for classic stuff is Robert E. Howard's Conan books. And when you look at, I think when most people think of classic fantasy, they think of the typical European medieval setting. And Howard didn't really do that. Mostly because it takes place way in the past. The Hyborian Age is, thousands of years back, and I that's kind of the approach that we wanted with our stuff. But definitely the action of his Conan books, those fight scenes, so quick, so fast, and over quickly. Because that's kind of the reality. When you're in a fight, it's not this huge prolonged ordeal. It usually ends within 5 to 15 seconds, unless you have a lot of opponents coming at you, which by then you're either you're really good and can, manage all of them. And, maybe the fight takes a minute, but it's not, this prolonged thing that you would see in, like in an old martial arts movie. Although those are fun to write, and, we tend to prolong things a little bit because we can use magic. So, we can draw out the fight a little bit because it's like, okay, well, we got magic going on, and they've got a barge in to protect them, and oh, that guy's got an Arpranara to keep him healed, so he's not going to go down as easy. And oh wait, that guy's got a Tevis roll that does something, whatever. And so it allows us to prolong the fight a little bit. But I think a lot of it is, especially with my martial arts background and some of that older influences, things, the action it peaks and then drops back down. And then we tend to try to do that to make it look more realistic. But
I love having action escalate. I love just throwing my readers into one scene, another, and another, and another. But sometimes the action isn't. Josiah, are you back online? Do you want to say something?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. It did look like your screen was your mic got muted somehow there, so you might have hit a button or something. So if you want to try your headphones again, feel free. But sometimes action isn't necessarily fighting. It's political stuff. It's so it's often tension or internal tension that the characters got as well. Right, you were going to say something before, Josiah. I've forgotten. Oh, you're talking about The Hobbit. How The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I mean, that was a huge influence for me too.
Yeah. Just talking about the influence of classic fantasy. It's interesting because in some ways I look more for the feelings and the world building and the emotions that they evoke, like the epicness, the epic scope of those. Which that's most like what I will try and bring in from those stories, because the style it's different these days. That for that I look more to modern books to try and move forward in some sense. But yeah, I mean, one trilogy I guess that I look to a lot is the Drizzt Do'Urden original trilogy. I think is it the Homeland trilogy? Yeah. That has amazing world building and character development too. And yeah, it's really good. And I think about that all the time. And like how they made it feel so strange and so different from our world, and just like totally suck you into, and like sympathy for Drizzt as well and his father figure. So yeah, there's like, what did they do so effectively, and how can I bring that into, even with like these differing kind of tight POVs, shorter sentences, less flowery language sometimes. Like, how do we bring that into our modern writing?
Yeah.
And I think that's for me. I didn't discover, when you first start writing, for readers, you might be interested in this. When you first start writing, people are saying, know your reader. Once you know your reader, you'll know what to write. And I kept thinking, but I don't have any readers yet. How do I know who my reader is? And when I published Azara and Dragon Hero back at the end of 2018, I was very, very lucky. My covers were new 3D generated dragons. Not many covers were out like that. Jada Fisher had a string of them, but Jada's books came out like a couple of months after mine, even though they had commissioned the covers beforehand. So my covers looked relatively new and people got really excited. And I had worked, over 9 years writing those books and honing them with a critique group where we critiqued each other. I was in 3 different critique groups getting my work critiqued. It was just crazy. And all of us learned a phenomenal amount, and all of us have gone on to win awards. And one of the people in my critique group has actually won 4 Bram Stoker awards. So we really helped each other get to quite a high level of writing. So I felt confident in my writing, but I didn't know who my readers were. And the minute people bought my books and started commenting and leaving reviews, I knew who my readers were. So my readers read for emotion and action. And I've got, there are some people who read for the whole cerebral, how is this? And they like to read for the whole mental, intellectual sort of thing. And I'm not saying my readers don't read for that as well, and yours, but I know that my readers are people who love emotional roller coasters. who love, you mentioned the sympathy and the empathy, but they love people going through heartache, and they love people coming out the other end and triumphing, because what are fantasy books but a platform for us to process our own emotions as we're reading. We all go through tough things in life, and sometimes life's hard. You pick up a book, you read a few chapters, and you feel better because somehow you've lived those emotions with the characters. It's helped you sort of reconcile your own. Often there's a message of hope. Some aren't. Grimdark books are not like that, right? But often there's a message of hope, of perseverance, of things working out. And I think fantasy is a great vehicle to help people process their own emotions. So how do you go about putting emotion into your stories? And you mentioned some of the classic influences, and what sort of reactions have you had from your readers about the emotional content of your books?
I think for ours, we like to, like you, Eileen, we like to pick the character that's going to be in the most pain, or has the most to lose.
What do we mean?
We are, but it's all about, reading is emotional stress training, and that it's like weightlifting for your emotions. So if the more you can plunge a person into torture and chaos and darkness, and then them rise out of it, I think that's all the better.
Well, that's interesting, because you call it emotional stress training. I call it therapy. So you're deliberately putting your readers through chaos to make them more resilient. Whereas I'm like, come here, process your emotions. It's actually the same thing. Really. But
yes.
I don't know. Any readers? Is there anyone online still who has thoughts about that? Nobody at the moment, but we might get some comments later about what people feel when they're reading and how it helps them with their emotions.
I have a slightly different angle too, because I think of it more as catharsis. So not so much training for something that I might go through or that I have gone through, but experiencing it so that I don't have to go through it, and yet I can still have that experience, right? Because I don't want to do anything of what my protagonists do. They do some really tough stuff, and it sounds like a lot of work, but I want to read about it, right? So that's kind of how I think about it.
Actually, I found too, for me, one of the things I love putting real emotions into my book. So I've got grief. Robert and I've mentioned that we both had kids that have died, which is quite a traumatic experience. Takes quite a long time to recover from. And sometimes you just feel like a zombie going through life when you've had something big like that hit you. No doubt you've had stuff in your life as well, Josiah. But I know that I use a lot of that real emotion and put it into my books. One of my favorite scenes, which my readers were like, no, how could you? I was dictating in the botanical gardens in Wellington, wandering around this path, and I thought, right, I'm going to have to take a really less frequented back path for this scene. And within about 20 meters of being up this tiny path where no one could see me, I was dictating, just bawling my head off as I'm killing off a favorite character. Don't tell. But my readers loved that scene, and everything had built in the series to the fact that you knew this character had to die. There was no way out, and having them go down in flaming glory was a great way, sacrificing themselves for someone else's good. So I think that catharsis thing, it can be the same when you're writing, but I also think that is the whole. I think that's the reason a lot of people read. They get to experience action, adventure, grief, heartache, triumphs, and they get to come through, hopefully, if we've been kind as authors, unscathed, but with the emotional journey.
Yeah, I think another thing that we do for conveying emotion is to really rely on the action and of what would a person that has experienced that particular heartache or pain be doing. Because I think by showing the action and showing the struggle of doing an action, like someone's been stabbed in the leg, and they're not just going to move their leg around like it's fine. There's got to be, you got to show the struggle there that character now has by having an immobile limb. And so I think as long as the actions are coming through, I think that makes it real. At least for me, like when I'm reading something, if I can get into what the character is doing, and I can feel like I can connect more as far as emotionally.
Yeah, you said so the action informs the emotion and vice versa, emotion informing the action,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what makes the action so impactful when there's something you care about at risk, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot in the series that I'm currently writing, the thing that you're worried about is, I mean, the protagonist somewhat, right? The protagonist is always at risk, but more their companions, because their companions are often frailer than they are. And so they're constantly at risk from getting, like killed. And in fact, that may or may not have just happened.
It's just happened in one of my books.
Yeah, no spoilers, but so yeah, like I mean, if things are like that, I guess that's why people say don't start off a book with an action scene, which is dicey advice. But
I have never
what?
heard before he did that.
You never heard that?
I've never heard that. I've heard don't start off with a conversation, and I've broken that rule where speech is the first thing that happens. I think you start a book with what's going to grab the readers and draw them in.
Mhm.
But that's interesting, Josiah. Have you broken that rule?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course. I mean,
What a rule!
every rule is meant to be broken, right? A lot of books start off with action scenes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Like what Way of Kings does, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, it starts off with like 3 action scenes.
Yeah.
Supposed to, I mean, part of when I wrote my first, when I wrote Azara, I had Azara in a clearing looking up and seeing a dragon, and everyone's like, "Oh, why is she there? What is she doing?" So I went back and I've put in a little bit of background so people get a feeling of normalcy of what her life was like before it happened. But I still start with action. The first thing is the scrape of a sword drawing from its scabbard, and she spins and drops her basket in the marketplace. Like that is the opening sentence and paragraph of my book. So yeah, but I that's really bizarre advice.
Well,
really bizarre rule.
So the idea, as far as I understand behind it, is that they think that you should care about the character before something happens to the character. So I think the advice is to somehow build sympathy, build empathy for that character, and then the act perhaps lead into action from there.
Yeah, which is why the whole setting up her life before she gets taken by the dragon makes sense. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You look like you
What
were
about Dan? Emotion?
Well, I was going to say when I, first started writing the books that we ended up with, the very first scene was the aftermath of a battle. That's how I started it. And then I kind of go back and kind of take the reader back. Okay, here's how this happened. But I start it because I'm trying to, because like you say, a lot of books start that way. You're trying to grab the attention of the reader, and you grab their attention. It's like, what is going on here
with all the dead bodies?
Yeah, with all the dead bodies,
and the grief.
And this one guy in black armor on a horse. What happened here? So
yeah.
So using flashbacks is an interesting way of building up backstory and things.
Yeah.
And that kind of like gets to the idea. Brandon Sanderson, I think, has introduced this something as like promises or something. I think it's
read a promise.
Yeah. You like open a box. You're making a promise by saying this is what's happening. Like why is this knight chasing this knight? Right? What is happening there? And maybe that's more like start a book off that way rather than like if it's action, if it's a conversation, right? You just want the reader to have questions on what's happening. Keep turning the page.
Yep.
So we're at sort of like 55 minutes now. Is there anything else you want to discuss? We're going to talk about A Prince's Errand, which is the book people have been able to download. I've downloaded my copy. I haven't yet had a chance to read it, but I will be because we have an indie fantasy summer reading challenge on at the moment. My Kindle is stuffed full of fantasy books to read. I'm reading one of Andy Pelican's at the moment. Oh, by the way, when you mentioned Conan, I know Russell Nolte, who's part of our Action Fantasy Book Club, is really big on, he loved all the Conan books growing up, and I think they were a big influence for him as well. So is there anything else you'd like to discuss or talk a little bit about A Prince's Errand and what happens there? Have you read it yet, Josiah?
I haven't yet. No,
Mm.
I'm intending to.
So no spoilers, okay?
Yes.
Oh, you've been giving spoilers all month. I've been looking at the Facebook post and going, "Oh, this is a spoiler." Yeah, I've been like, "Oops." And I love the posts you've been doing in the group. Like there are so many, all the diagrams and the illustrations, and it's been really, really cool to see parts of your world and get glimpses into it. So I'm hoping that our readers are enjoying those. And
I
even
hope
if
so.
even if readers see this later, drop us a comment down below and tell us what you've loved about the posts that Dan's been leaving and Robert have been leaving in our Facebook group.
I think for me, so A Prince's Errand takes a lot of newer stuff, and it's a newer approach, but we have a lot of classic fantasy themes. And I mean, when it released, it was the #1 new release in classic fantasy on Amazon, and so I think for readers, we wanted to have some of the traditional things while keeping it new. Like for instance, my dad mentioned Dungeons and Dragons was a huge influence. Lord of the Rings was a big influence as well. And Forgotten Realms, I love all the Dritz books, and of course the video games and Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale. And so a lot of those things informed us, and there's a lot of classic things as far as what we have in the story. But I kind of think that the writing is a little more modern, and we did that, because to appeal to more readers. While we did like that classic approach of that omniscient third, it just it didn't quite work for this day and age, and we're okay with that. But there's still things that we wanted to pay homage to. If my dad had finished these stories back in the 90s, what would it have been like? And that's part of the reason why we have the cover how we have it, and it looks like it's a Wheel of Time book, or a Terry Brooks book, or anything that Bill might have published.
Yeah.
So we kind of you got that nostalgia, and we've had readers say that they felt very nostalgic reading A Prince's Errand, and I think it's part of the the adventure. There's a lot of wonder, and I feel like a lot of classic fantasy was able to just introduce weird, brand new, fresh stuff that people hadn't really seen. And now we're kind of, we're accustomed to that. And so it might not seem as wondrous nowadays. But, we kind of took that approach of, okay, what can we do with this setting to make this just even weirder? And so while the benchmark classic fantasy might have set a benchmark for something, we're like, okay, what can we go beyond that? And like, for instance, in the middle of the book when they're going to Klindala, there's some things there that you'll see that we were like, okay, we know what you would normally expect, but how can we make it even more weirder, bizarre? Yes.
Yes.
and I think that's kind of our approach is, because we look at the classic stuff and we're familiar with it, we're like, what can we do that's weirder? And that kind of happens to be our go-to question. Maybe it's our motto. What can we do to make it weirder? Like, just to evoke that wonder emotion of that.
Yeah.
And the unexpected.
Too much Monty Python when I was a kid.
I was going to say Twilight Zone.
No, that too. What's that? What was that, Eileen?
Oh, I just said I missed what you said. It was a bit quiet.
Oh, I said, I guess I watched too much Monty Python when I was younger.
I love
when he was talking about somebody getting stabbed, the thought went through my mind, but it's just a flesh wound.
Well, it's just a bunny rabbit.
It's
one of my favorite scenes. Who happens to, latch onto your throat and kill you, but just for readers who haven't seen that.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about making things bizarre or unexpected. Yeah, I can't ask for spoilers, can I? Yeah,
You can.
Yeah.
Don't do spoilers.
I mean, I loved
one
Anne
bizarre,
McCaffrey. Like,
one bizarre thing.
okay.
Um,
I loved Anne McCaffrey, and so that whole sci-fi, having sci-fi elements in my fantasy world was quite important to me. And so, big spoilers, I'm not going to tell you what they are though. But so in book 5 and 6 of Riders of Fire, you suddenly discover this whole sci-fi side to the world that you had no idea was underpinning it. And now I'm writing the prequels, so I'm showing that being from a future dystopian Earth coming through into my fantasy world, and we're going to see how he sets up his lab and does all this cloning of his creatures. And I have given away the spoilers. So, but yeah, all this stuff. All this stuff comes out in book 5 and 6, and my readers are like, "Oh my goodness, I never saw that coming." And I'm like, "Well, the seeds for it were in book 1. They were in book 2. I always knew this was going to happen. I was just keeping it back so you wouldn't, because medieval people don't say, 'Oh, he must be cloning these monsters.' They say, 'Oh, he takes cuttings like we do for a plant and grows them.' So it's sort of like, there's little hints here and there. So, but yeah, it's quite funny.
We not technically a spoiler, but we do like to include there is, because we love science fiction, and we also love fantasy. We decided one of the things when we first started out was we're going to blend the two. And sci-fan is a genre. It's not as popular, but we decided we wanted something. We wanted that futuristic element to it, and so you see a little bit of that. And even the central premise to the story is there's a scholar, Crindall, in the beginning of the book that has this theory of cultural regression, that the world was once grander than it once was.
Oh wow,
and
that's cool.
That's the quest, is he's trying to find the proof, and he has proof in the form of this magical object, which we've decided to call Tevis rolls, which is we took technological magical device and we pulled a whole bunch of words from letters from it and rearranged it. It took us like 2 years to figure out this word, only to find out that Sanderson has something called a fabrial, and I'm like,
dang.
And so there's some similarity there, and I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. We're sticking with his word.
Borrowing arrowheads that are actually microchips. It's like microchips attached to them. Everyone calls them crystals. So, for my readers who've read my series and not picked up on that, yeah, that's sort of what they are. So, yeah.
So that's
what
kind
about
of
you, Josiah? Do you have anything strange like that? Or is yours just traditional medieval?
So
like
I have sci-fi in my fantasy. I'm just a strict fantasy kind of guy. It is interesting. So is Wheel of Time kind of an influence behind the sci-fi elements not for that one?
Okay. Confession, neither of us read The Wheel of Time until we hired Michael Kramer to narrate.
Okay. Yeah.
And I haven't finished it yet. And I see some of the similarities, and I'm like, okay. So when we talk about our classic fantasy influences, it's really everything like pre-1990.
You're doing Dad's classical
yeah
fantasy influence. Did you cram all those books down Robert when he was young?
Well, that's what I gave him to read when he was a kid. It's like, I got these books. I had this library, all of these old fantasy books and science fiction books, and it was like, here, you want to read this stuff.
So yeah, there was having read what I've got to in The Wheel of Time, I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, I can kind of see some similarity here, and the whole there is a little bit of where the world was much more advanced than it is now, and that's kind of I wanted to have a dystopian element to A Prince's Errand. So it looks like it's fantasy, but in a way it's dystopian for the people that know what it was like. And but we're able to play it off as fantasy for them. and you see that a little bit in The Prince's Errand, but you really see it in The Prisoner of Tartalum, our prequel novel. And so, having that kind of underpinning to our world building allows us to be like, okay, we know what this is, but the reader doesn't know and the character doesn't know. So how do we describe this to where it's, what it is, but be vague enough to where the reader could think, wait a second, that sounds like that's some kind of technology.
Yeah, I love that.
It's very subtle, isn't it? You just put yeah.
And
I think most readers pick up on it. They're pretty intelligent people.
Yeah, most
They've
do.
got to be. They're reading our books, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right.
must be.
There you go, wave to the readers.
Yeah, the blending of sci-fi and fantasy, though, it is pretty classic in some senses. Like, I don't think Lord of the Rings does it, to my knowledge, but you mentioned Dragon Riders of Pern before, Eileen. That definitely does, right? And even more modern, Joe Abercrombie has a series that's very distinctly sci-fi fantasy. Mark Lawrence, I think most of his are kind of sci-fi fantasy. So it's interesting how often those two do get blended together. It's just you go far enough in the future, degrade things enough, and then technology becomes magic, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So is that how your magic actually magic as well, or is it all based on some technology? I guess this would go for both.
Because you've got amulets and all those sort of things, haven't you? You've got a lot of magical artifacts in your books.
It is a supernatural force, and there are things that that can harness that. And so our technology, like the Tevis rolls, they draw from this source. And with our mages, they draw from the source as well, but using incantation and their mental focus to actually manifest magic. So yeah, there is magic, actual magic, and there is a source to it that's called the channels of power, and there's also physical manifestations of it, which we haven't really quite seen completely in the main books. There's some allusion to it, but they're the orbs of power, and they were inspired by the Silmarillion. The Silmarils, really.
Yeah.
I tried to read the Silmarillion at 10 years old. It was too hard. I read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit at like 8 and 9 and reread them. And then I started the Silmarillion and I was 10 and I was like, huh? And then I went back to it when I was older. I was like, oh, now I understand it.
The
language.
He had me read the Silmarillion. I think I was maybe about 12, actually.
Yeah.
But
I think that's
I actually really enjoyed it. Like, because there's all that lore and it's like, it's not your typical narrative.
I think
it's some of my favorite stuff
for a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So yeah, we have actual magic plus that, and we even have some, which we were getting into in the Dark Necromancer, these plants that emit magic, and so a little bit of an alchemy kind of a thing. But we wanted to have like multiple ways that the magic source can be accessed, and so there's technology, there's esoteric stuff through like the incantations, and there's the physical manifestations, and so we kind of wanted to have it varied a little bit. But definitely it's definitely a hard magic system, and there's a lot of rules and a lot of different, like I drew up a diagram, and I'm still adding to the diagram. Our editor had said, can you like give me the whole like rule book of the channels of power? And I said no, because I haven't finished it. Because even if I did put every single spell and everything in there, it probably right now is about 300 pages. And so it's like, yeah, there's quite a bit.
Yeah, you can run a campaign based off of that, basically, huh?
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah. We'll have our own, rule book for it just on the magic system.
Kickstarter idea right there. New game.
What
Yep,
about
actually,
Josiah?
well,
Yeah,
we've actually been planning one for the last
we've been thinking
7
about that.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've been
it's
thinking
in the
about.
works.
I
They've
was
been in
thinking
this
that
game a
all
while,
along.
Josiah.
Yeah, right. Dan, sorry, what was that?
I was thinking that all along. You know, coming
Oh,
from
there
a
you
Dungeons and Dragons background, I was thinking, how can we make this into a game? We really could make this into a fun game.
Yeah.
And when 5th edition came along, that's really when it became more viable, because it was, well, we can use that as a platform. And then, you know, we were working on it, and then everything that happened last year with the 5th edition debacle, and then we're like, maybe we pull the plug on this for a little bit. But yeah, our big hurdle there was doing the artwork for it, and because, you know, we could probably write out the actual text stuff fast, but the artwork is the real hurdle there.
Yeah, and you need a lot
And
of
you
it.
already have a lot of artwork. I mean, look at everything you've been posting. It's amazing.
Yeah, we
How did you
estimated
get that
it
body?
was going to be about $50,000 to create all the artwork we needed just for the core rulebook campaign. So,
But, you know, considering what happened with Wizards of the Coast, right, was the issue. Like they were like pulling. I only got vague whispers of what happened, but it was something like they didn't allow people to use their rules anymore for some.
well, what it was is that anything that was published under the open game license, whatever creative content, was going to be, they could have the rights to it. So they, by publishing something in the open game content, then they could do whatever they wanted to, which essentially could be novel adaptations, movie adaptations. And so there was a whole rights issue there that they were trying to loop in, and pretty much saying everything that's been done in 5th edition, we technically can do whatever we want with it, and you have no more rights anymore.
Which, when you've put all that work in as an author, I mean, readers might take a few days to read a novel or a few weeks, but we sometimes take months and years to produce them. You know, there's a lot of hours that go into them. And just having that work be taken by someone else to do, you know, go make a movie, make millions out of it, is not quite what you want when you're sitting there with no rights and you don't get paid for it. So, yeah, that's understandable. Josiah, did you want to give us a quick comment about your magic systems and what sort of magic exists in your worlds?
Sure. We'll have to choose. Maybe I'll go with the one that's most classic. Legend of Tall is the one that's probably most directly influenced by classic fantasy. You know, it's got elves, dwarves, you know, all of the best things. For that, the magic system, I think it's probably a little similar to what you were describing, Robert. It's sourced from the earth, kind of has ley lines. If you've ever heard of that sort of term, it's sort of like ley lines where there's like magic threading throughout the world. Only some people can access it, such as elves. They would naturally be able to access it. Humans would only be able to access it via certain methods, right? Warlocks would use some kind of patron deity to be able to access it, stuff like that. But yeah, as far as how it manifested, I was pretty influenced by Dungeons and Dragons and just like wanted it to basically be, you know, chaotic energy that you can use however you want, but you use, say, words of power or runes or something like that. So yeah, it's very much influenced by all the games and the classic stories I'd read.
Okay. So I've tended to use a lot of elemental. We've got the magic of dragons bonding with riders, which is, you know, and telepathy between bonded riders and dragons. We've got one guy who's a dragon mage who can mind meld or have telepathy with any dragon across the realm. But generally, I've got elemental magic where people can draw on the environmental energy around them, and it's called Sophia. So they can sense the energy of living things and use it to create magic. Now, it doesn't deplete any, like if you use a tree's Sophia, it doesn't deplete the tree, it doesn't kill things, but you can, and only people with mage blood can do that. So anyone who's born a mage, or it's a genetic thing. But however people harness it is different. Some of the mages can use talismans and create them. It's quite rare, but some of them can. So there are a few little talismans. I have massive herbal lore. Like there's a massive healing component, and my herbal glossary keeps growing with poisons and herbs and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess it's elemental magic mainly with mine. I do have the odd mage in a different land that uses spells, but they're not that common. Like there's not a lot of that sort of magic that's happening. So yeah, that's my word. It's mainly elemental magic. I love elemental magic. Earth, fire, wind, power, water. All of those sort of elements. So
yeah, they even like for many magic systems, they have to be the basis to some extent. Like, I mean, what's more destructive? Like fire is very destructive. It's a natural part of using it for magic. Yeah, and I've sometimes thought like, how can I like do things that are different than this? I did something like, what did you call it, Sophia?
Sophia, yeah, Sathir, Sophia.
It's pretty similar to what I decided to do in my latest series, which is like life magic based, right? So yeah. Unlike yours. Yours sounds much nicer than mine. Mine kills whatever you're like sucking the life out of.
Yeah, I kept thinking there must be a consequence for this, and then I just decided that I didn't want to have these people killing the environment. But there is, if they use a lot of it, it affects them. They get depleted, they get exhausted. So there's got to be a price for using magic. Right, but also you've got these rampant monsters who've been cloned going through killing people, and taking people back as slaves to Death Valley to mine these crystals, which end up, but I suppose, I don't think they're radioactive, but they can be used for weapons and stuff on Earth. And so this guy, the bad guy, has this whole thing that he wants to get out of this hellhole he's living in and get back, but the world gate is closed and he cannot open it. And so that's sort of, there's a whole theme running through there, which culminates in a big climax in a war. So yeah. Okay, I think we've chatted for a wee while. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss about a Princess Errand other than telling our people to go read the book, download it and read it? I think a newsletter just went out, didn't it, yesterday? Or was it today? Yeah, it's the 30th here. 29th, the newsletter went out this morning, your time, with another link to download that book. So that's still available. And
throughout the year, we'll be sending people the link as well. So if you're coming on to the book club later in the year, you'll get a link to download it when you sign up. So we'll be including that every month when we send out our portion of the newsletter for the book club. So if you missed it, don't worry. You'll still get it as long as you join by December 31st.
Yeah. Okay. It's been great being a part of the book club, hasn't it? And we've got a little Facebook group. If people haven't joined that, we'll see if we can drop that in the YouTube, get Andy to add that to the YouTube link so people can pop in and join in the community there. I think, no, that only comes out through the newsletter. So you have to join. If you haven't joined the Action Fantasy Book Club and you have stumbled across this on YouTube, then hop over to the site, which is Action Fantasy Book Club. And then you can sign up and you'll get a link to the Facebook group where readers discuss books and hang out together and have some fun. Okay, is there anything else you want to add, Josiah, Dan?
No, I'm just looking forward to reading A Princess Errand. I mean, I make it weird. That sounds right up my alley. So,
and it's a long book that you can get your teeth into, so that's great.
Yeah. Yep. It's also available on Audible, and if you're watching it here on YouTube, we actually have it on YouTube on our YouTube channel, Legends of Calda Entertainment, so you can check it out there too.
Yeah, that's right. You've got a new YouTube channel. How many subscribers do you have now? Have you hit the magic 1,000 number yet?
Almost. I think we're at 988
That's pretty close.
this morning, so I haven't checked it, but we're getting close. So hopefully by my birthday on Monday, we will be at 1,000. So if not, I'll post something on Facebook and say, hey, if you wish me happy birthday, go like my Facebook or my YouTube channel, and that'd be my birthday present.
That would be very cool, because you've got a big giveaway coming when you hit 1,000, haven't you?
We do. We've got a whole bunch. A lot of them were classic fantasy books that we sourced from our local used bookstore. We've done signings there before, but I think we spent about $200 on just a whole bunch of different books. There's some. There was a couple. Salvatore books in there. Then I've got David Farland's first 4 books of the Rune Lords in that giveaway, and I can't remember. I've got them all boxed up and
Ready to
protected.
see.
But I was like, I'm just gonna go start grabbing things and make sure we had either the first book or the first, all three in a trilogy. And so we got a pretty big giveaway for one lucky winner.
That's very cool, isn't it? I'm sure you're not going to send them all the way to New Zealand. Postage is prohibitive. So it's probably, is it a US giveaway? Anyway, you'll sort that out with the lucky winner.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to thank everyone for coming along. If you're seeing this later, feel free to drop comments and ask questions, and the Zangari dynamic duo will come and answer them. And we thank you very much for being part of the Action Fantasy Book Club. Bye from New Zealand.
Bye.
Bye.